Well, hey, everybody. Welcome back to another week of the Fixate Binge Podcast. I'm Joe, your host. And if you're a little bit distressed from current events happening around the world, especially in the Middle East, and you just need a break, your For You page on TikTok is filling up with news updates about terrible things happening in Iran, and across the world, and you're upset about certain things. You just need a break from that, just to take yourself out of that headspace. I want you to think of this podcast as that opportunity to do that. I have a great guest, one of the best guests I've ever had. I say this and I even feel it in my bones. Every guest I have on the Fixate Binge podcast is always a fantastic, phenomenal guest. If you didn't listen to last week's episode, I had the Addams family from the Catskills, New York. They are husband, wife, mother, father, production company, and they make films together, and they've been making films for the Shudder, and a lot of their films are very, very independent, but very, very macabre and horror themed, and they explore all kinds of interesting things. And I had such a great conversation with John and Toby about their film, Mother of Flies. If you haven't listened to that one yet, please tune in. That's last week's episode. And it's always good to just go back and catch the one you missed. For this episode, I'm very, very excited. I have about to cut to the interview I had with him earlier in the week. It is Jethro Waters, is an Emmy award-winning filmmaker and true cinematic craftsman, a writer, director, cinematographer, editor, and composer whose films really feel deeply personal, which is true, of course, as you'll soon find out, and visually daring. He had a wonderful film that I got an opportunity to screen early before it was released to the general public, and that film is called Gunfighter Paradise. I wrote a review of it. I had to adhere to a review embargo on it. And if you're unfamiliar, what is a review embargo? That is where the producers of a film that has not been released to the public or released to be reviewed at Rotten Tomatoes or whatever it may be, they ask film reviewers, can you please hold off until this date, and then you can publish your review. And that date was February 23rd. So I had written this review a couple weeks ago, and I held on to it for me to put it on my Letterboxd account. And then boom, Monday the 23rd hit, boom, I dropped my review, and then I had my guest, Jethro Waters, on the podcast. And I gotta tell you, I really vibed with him. I had such a great conversation with him, and his headspace and his inspiration and what he's doing with his material and his creative choices and his instincts. They really are prescient. I really feel that's the right word for it. Very prescient. He has such a singular creative voice, and it really feels isolated. Unfortunately, I think we need more voices like Jethro. I think we need more filmmakers, and whether it's independent or mainstream, with mainstream budgets and stuff, we need a little bit more courageousness when it comes to this type of content, because it was so satirical and darkly humorous, but also very instructive. I found Gunfighter Paradise a very visually interesting essay on Americana and where we are now in the 21st century, especially in the Trump years. This isn't an anti-this or an anti-that film. So I don't want you to be like, oh no, if it's got those elements in it, I'm out. I don't want you to feel that way. This is an interesting film, and my guest brings a perspective that you don't often see when it comes to filmmaking. I'm so excited to introduce you to him. I'm going to shut up now. I'm going to let him come on, and I hope you enjoy this conversation that we both had. In other news, there's not much going on in terms of what I've seen lately that I could recommend to you, but I hope you enjoy our conversation. Again, my talented, wonderfully creative, and very intelligent guest is Jethro Waters, and he joins me right now. Our interview begins on the Fixate and Binge podcast. So I'll see you next week. Hey, Jethro, how are you doing?
Hey, Joseph, nice to meet you.
You're really nice to meet you, and nice to see you without all the camouflage on your face.
It is so nice not to wear that stuff. It's great.
I mean, you had to have that on every frame of the film that you're in, if I'm not mistaken.
Yep, that's true. Yeah,
that seemed like a very literal decision.
Yeah, it was. Well, I mean, I never intended actually to be in the film. It happened because it was, I'd cast my good friend Ben, who's a fantastic actor, and he just happened to be having a child right when we started production. And so I looked around, and everybody was ready. We had the dates, and I thought, well, I'll give it a shot for 2 weeks because I've never been in anything else, never intended to be in anything else. And I was like, if it's terrible, I'll throw in the trash can and we'll find a new person. But if it works, we'll keep rolling. So it seemed to work, and so we kept going.
That is awesome. I want to get right down to it. I did write a review, and I know that there's an embargo until Monday the 23rd, so I will hold off on posting that on Letterboxd. But I was floored. By your film. I'm a student of literature. I have graduate degrees in English Lit, and there were a lot of tropes in the film. And I know I'm skipping around, but there were Arthurian tropes. There were, Homer's The Odyssey. Obviously, there is that trope. But the thing that I thought of was there are certain elements of your film that if you watch it, I felt it comes very close to being an epic poem in that the invocation of the muses, which is one of the things you have to have, is that bit about the gun and the this kind of almost sacrosanct description of how to carry a gun and fire a gun. And it was almost, like a reverence for the gun. The other element of an epic poem is in medias res, in the middle of things. And your character, as he emerges out of the forest, is very much in the middle of things. We know that there's been things that have been happening before. There's been some personal family tragedy. So I know I'm sandboxing here. I'm standing on, I'm kind of pontificating here. I don't know if you were going for that, but I think the argument could be made that there are elements of an epic poem here.
I absolutely love that, and I always hoped to have these kinds of conversations because firstly, I just say thank you for saying that, and I'm glad that's what you got from the film, because I'm obviously, as most of us are, I'm a huge poetry fan, huge epic poetry fan. Those things were all rattling around in my mind. I definitely didn't sit down to write the script to say, okay, I'm going to write the new American epic poem.
Right.
That wasn't there. But of course, as you write those stories, and when you're thinking about a character like Stoner in the modern American times, and you're thinking about the sword or the gun as this magic thing that the American gunslinger, the American gunfighter is our Arthurian hero, right? We think about the Western and that gunslinger as that person, right? So I didn't sit down and draw the hero's journey as a complete cycle of tragedy for Stoner, which is essentially what it is. But there's so much. There are a lot of references to my favorite writers, which are poets and classic literature, woven into the film, which I'm sure is what you were picking up on.
I definitely was. Right away, you hit me over the head in a very effective way with that Mark Twain quote at the beginning of your film. And I think as I watched the film and the film was over, I was like, what did I just sit down and witness? And then I went back and I reread the Twain quote, and then it all became very clear what you were trying to say. As far as my impressions of it, I'm like, I probably should have kept that Twain quote uppermost in my mind throughout this film, because it makes perfect sense to me. I grew up in the South. I grew up in Houston, Texas. I was raised by Reagan conservatives. I have family that doesn't speak to me anymore. They're hardcore Second Amendment people. I've referred to them as gundamentalists. They big time MAGA, and I worry about their deeply Christian They're Mormon. They're deeply Christian, deeply supporters of the U.S. Constitution, hardline Second Amendment supporters. I have these people in my family. And as I watched your film, I was like, I'm there. I can connect with this concern, this worry, a Venn diagram where fundamentalists and patriotism and religious hysteria kind of converge. And I thought your film captured all of those elements very well.
Thank you so much. Those are the three elements we were aiming at. And I also I was born in Austin, Texas. I was there until I was 11, so I had some city experience. Then we moved to rural North Carolina, which is where the film is shot, on family property that I borrowed from friends and family. That we seriously just asked people, where do I find a house that looks like this? It looks just like the house I grew up in. So I'm the same. My family. They're a little bit split. My parents, my dad's a very conservative Christian, Reagan conservative. Stopped voting after the first Bush administrations when the WMDs were found out to be a hoax. So he was like, I'm not voting anymore. I was in Vietnam. I did what I was supposed to do. Him and I are very, very close. And my mom is much more on the progressive side of things, and she had me in books. My dad had me on the gun range. So I grew up speaking both of those languages, right? So my dad was a gunsmith, and I seriously grew up shooting competition rifle and pistol. So that world is a language that I know really well. I also, my mom is the absolute opposite of that, And so it was really interesting growing up in these two worlds and speaking both those languages and being from the South. And we had gone to a relatively low-key, non-denominational church, but then when we got to the South, I went with my friend to a Fire and Brimstone Baptist church and had my brain annihilated. I didn't know what was going on, and so it was really interesting in the way that I kind of saw the cracks in organized Christianity really, really early, kind of like 13, 14, 15. I was like, this doesn't make any sense. So I think coming from Austin, landing in the rural South allowed me to be an observer of all that rather than just baked into conservative Christianity, and so that's where all of that comes from is kind of growing up as an observer of what is this, and yeah.
Well, I love that because I was going to ask you, was there a specific moment, idea, or experience that you had where you're like, I've got to make a film, or I have something to say about this, and maybe it's nebulous right now, but I have to say something about this, and then you went with a film. Was there a moment or a process that you experienced that was the catalyst for what ultimately became Gunfighter Paradise?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think I've been thinking about this kind of character for a long time, since around 2015, and when things, the political landscape changed for the worse in the biggest way ever. Right. I started thinking about it a lot, and then it was cooking for a long time. And then when I started writing the actual script in 2021, but I was writing from the perspective of, let me write the most absurd version of this guy that I know, that I could have become if I hadn't opened my mind up a little bit when I was a teenager. Like I could have actually turned into that guy, who's got the "don't tread on me" flags and is an absolute, nutcase out in the woods, listening to voices from God. So I was like, let me just lean into that and see what comes out of that. And so it was that character and that idea of where we are headed, and we're definitely headed right now. I didn't think I would see a lot of Stoner, the main character, walking around the streets, but we have those guys in America right now. And so I didn't think that in 2021 when I was writing it, I was like, this is going to be so absurd. But I was writing it as a dark comedy and a commentary on religion, especially religion in the United States, and that being mixed with gun culture, and that being mixed with patriotism and all these ideas of what it means to be an American man, and all that kind of stuff, right? But so that was the initial spark, was the idea of, let me just write the most extreme version of this person that I know for sure I could have become, given a different journey, a different path in my life.
I feel you, because I feel the same way. I really do. I feel the same way. I grew up on a farm, deeply entrenched in Southern ideas and political leanings. My dad also is a Vietnam vet. My parents met during the Vietnam War. They were both in the Navy. I sometimes tell people on a personal note, there's only one reason I'm glad the Vietnam War happened, because my parents met while they were in the Navy. So so my whole existence is dependent on an actual horrible war.
Right.
But you wrote something. There's so many quotable things in your screenplay, and I want to highlight that because it's just utterly brilliant. And one of the ones that stood out was you said, fathers often deploy their sons as religious mercenaries, and this is how the father barters his way into heaven by teaching the son how to harvest a soul. Mind blown. That's brilliant.
Thank you. I really appreciate it. That was one of those lines when I was working on it. I was like, woof, there's some people that are not going to like this.
No, they're not.
They're not going to like hearing that. And it's funny because, I played it we had some hometown screenings that I had, like middle school teachers and high school teachers and old friends I haven't seen in 15 years or so. And we just packed out this, hometown screening in this, and there was, half of the audience were Southern Baptists, if not more. And they laughed their heads off the entire film. And I was kind of selling them short, thinking they're going to hate me and they're going to walk out of this film. And a lot of my friends are like, dude, you're about to get it from all of the people we grew up with. And it turns out, they laughed harder at all the jokes about that than anybody else anywhere, even in Germany, and other places. So
Wow.
and my wife pointed out, she goes, you sold all those people short, that they didn't have a sense of humor about themselves. And you're like, you know what? I did. Absolutely. So it actually landed in a very different way than I'd imagined. But going back to that quote specifically, that's just something, as you well know, having a very similar background to mine, that you see happening.
Right.
It happens throughout, not just fathers teaching their sons they need to go evangelize to other people to get them to be a Christian. You see it, like I've gone to 2 friends' funerals in the last 2 months and had the preacher, who didn't know a thing about the friend who passed away, not talk about the person that we were there to mourn, but talk about the fact that try to scare you into believing their religion because, this person believed it, so they're definitely in heavens. But if you don't believe it, you better get right soon or you're going to hell. And I was like, what are we doing? We're supposed to be mourning this person and you're supposed to be talking about their life. And instead you're pitching us and evangelizing to us. And that's another reason I wrote that quote, because I was like, this happens. It's rampant, it's for people to take their sons and daughters and their friends and try to turn them into these little religious mercenaries, for their own benefit.
It is very true. I absolutely agree with this. One of the riffs that I have with my dad, and I know that I'm a disappointment to him, because in 2016 I said, forget it. I can't vote for this idiot, and I have had the pleasure of not voting for him for three times. I've said, I'm sorry. I can't continue to walk with you, Dad.
Right.
And I departed, and he's been so disappointed. He's mad that I live in California and my son is going to go to California State University and get indoctrinated with liberal socialist ideologies. And he said things and it hung up on me, and it really sucks. But fathers and sons, it's almost like it's the one thing I feel that dads want to pass on to their kids. I got to tell you, as a parent, I would be horrified if any of my kids decided to go right wing and to be, I don't know, xenophobic or a little bit bigoted, against certain groups of people. I would be crushed. It would definitely affect my relationship with them.
Sure. Absolutely. Yeah, no, it's a tragedy what's going on in this country right now, and it didn't have to be that way. I'd never had a problem before 2015 with the fact that a lot of my friends and family are on the conservative side of things, because I understand where they're coming from. I understand that perspective because I grew up inside of it. But I think we had a fundamental change in morality and what's considered decent and just fundamentally as a country in 2015 and 2016. And I think that we've been on a very quick downward spiral ever since,
That is absolutely correct. It feels like the goalposts of what is acceptable moral behavior have completely moved so far down the field. I can't see the goalposts anymore.
Right.
Nothing feels off limits, and I say this on a day where Britain arrested a former prince in the royal family for his shenanigans. And which I can't believe. That goes back to medieval times when they would lock up princes and princesses in the Tower of London, and yet we've arrested one. And so it's weird that a country like Britain is kind of leading the way in terms of moral turpitude
Right.
in public life, and whereas in our country it's like nobody gets arrested, you know. And I
Right.
know I'm obliquely talking about something that's in the news cycle 24/7, but I want to get back to your film. I'm sorry that
Sure.
I
No, no, but that's the thing is these kind of tangential things aren't tangential because that's deeply baked into the film, you know. And
yeah.
the film isn't. I got slack for at one point for saying the film isn't exactly political when I was at a film festival and being like, oh, it is because you're talking about libertarians, and I was like, well, you can't escape the fact that there are political elements in the film because we live in a country that's hyper political, and I am making statements with certain flags and with certain actions in the film 100%. I was like, but the film is more about, well, the film is really about religion, and the film is really about the psychosis of what conservative Christianity, specifically in America, does to people. That's what the film is about, right?
I love that word psychosis because that's exactly what I'm seeing. I'm seeing that. I'm seeing a lot of that, a lot of cognitive dissonance, a lot of Dunning-Kruger. You know, people just feel, and the internet has proliferated this. I mean, it really has changed the national discourse, coarsening it, I think. And it's,
Right.
oh, we could go on and on about this, Jethro. So the Southern landscape, and I think that was very intentional. I mean, yeah, you have Southern background, but this feels spiritually and culturally rooted in the American South. I mean, I think if you had set this in, I don't know, like Topeka, Kansas, or Blackfoot, Idaho. Maybe Blackfoot, Idaho. There some, or Portland, Oregon. This just doesn't resonate the same way. And so your film, where it's regionally set, it feels, and you've already confirmed this, but that feels like a lived experience that feels authentic. And I don't know if you wanted to speak to that.
Yeah, no, it is very much. I mean, if I told you how many moments in this film are autobiographical, you would find it absurd because there's so many funny moments growing up that I thought other people would relate to, both the darkness and the lighthearted, dry humor and nonsense, that these folks in this film get up to. But a lot of that, I mean, even the VHS footage of the young boy speed shooting. That's me when I was 12.
That's you?
That's me. Yeah. And so I was a competition speed shooter by the time I was 11 and 12 years old. And, and to speak to that just a little bit, it's still a lived experience for me because my dad and I, we are really close. We've been very, very, we've never not been close. Even though we have very differing beliefs, we see more in common than we see less in common. That doesn't make any sense what I just said, but
No,
we
get it,
still,
though.
if I go hang out with my dad, it's like, what are we doing? I was like, you want to go to the range and shoot some targets? I'm like, sure. So we go to the range, and we, put up something at 500 yards and see who hit the bullseye, those kinds of things, because that's how we communicate. And that's part of our relationship. But, I wanted to make a film that was sincere, and
Yeah.
that the way to do that is to do something that you really know through and through. And that's a world that I really know through and through,
Well, it feels, like I said, I use the word authentic, and that feels like a lived experience, something that, and you know what they say, write what you know and direct what you know. And that comes through very, very clearly. I wanted to talk a little bit about the casting of Jessica Hecht or Hecht.
Yeah.
I have, every time I watch TV, she pops up. I saw a Seinfeld episode. She popped up in Seinfeld. Me and my kids, my older kids, we're watching Breaking Bad. It's my 17-year-old and my 21-year-old's first time watching Breaking Bad. And I love watching that show. So we're watching it together and she's in that. And I'm like, and then she shows up in Gunfighter Paradise and her, as the mother and her presence. And I thought her voiceover work was very paternal and emotional, but it's juxtaposed with your voiceover work, and so where she's very soothing, you're very kind of psychologically unraveling. It forms a really interesting dichotomy, and I wanted to know if you wanted to dive into that. Was that an intentional thing?
100%. That's you're the first person to ask the question, which I love. That you're the first person to ask the question about Jessica and that the dual nature of stoner becoming his psychosis deepening while you have this steady voice from Jessica. Jessica just happened to be a good friend through mutual friends over the last couple of years. We did some documentary work with her for a nonprofit. She has an amazing nonprofit that she does a lot of work for asylum seekers and refugees in the United States. She's done that all over the world. So I started working with her to make, just pro bono, let's go make this doc to help Jessica's nonprofit out. And so we became buddies that way. And I told her, I'm making this hyper indie, nobody's getting paid. It's all just a group of friends. Here's kind of what it's about. Here is what, if you would be interested, I would love to have, because I hear your voice every time I'm looking at this script, I hear your voice. And she was like, oh, sure. So we seriously, one afternoon, we met in Midtown, went to this hotel because I wouldn't have a sound booth. So I was like, I'll just go to this hotel. And so I set up, a little sound booth in the hotel room. And she's so good that she came in, she had her paper, her lines, and there was only one piece of that she did a second take on. All of it was first take. And it took us 45 minutes. She was out of the room and I had, the entire voiceover for the film. She's that good. But yeah, I'm with you. Like for me, it's Jessica represents in that film, or the voiceover, her character is kind of one of the very few voices of reason in the film. Yeah. And then that's an intentional thing, the voice of the mother being this voice of reason, and Jessica's, her ability is just is miraculous. She's an amazing talent.
And thank you. And she absolutely is. I'm such a fan of hers. And yeah, I got a bit of a crush on her. So there's that too. Every time she shows up, I'm like, oh, yeah. She's so awesome. And yeah. But like a platonic crush, right. Not like a stalker crush. I get. But so she's just so good in anything she does.
She is.
And she just carries a sincerity and a genuine sincerity to anything she does. And I'm always a fan, whether it's great range, comedy, drama. But what really struck me is the mother's narrations. If I have this correct, they diminish. And your voiceovers and your ruminations, they increase. Mm-hmm. And so what I hear a mother's influence on your psyche, your character's psyche, on Stoner's psyche, diminishing, and you're taking over what you think is going on. It's something similar. I pointed this out once. I don't think I convinced anybody in grad school that I thought that was happening in Shakespeare's Richard III, where you have the Duke of Gloucester, he becomes the king. He's got all these soliloquies where he's trying to convince himself he's a good guy and everything else. And then as the play goes on, the soliloquies start to vanish, start to go away, and his actions start speaking louder than his soliloquies, because he's not talking to us anymore. He's just doing. And I felt that way watching your film in a similar way, is that she's this influence and it appears to be dimming and yours appears to be taking over.
Right.
I don't know if that was a choice, but it certainly came through that way.
100%. I mean, there is a specific reason that her voiceover stops at a certain point in the film, mm-hmm. right? And that's, if we're looking at America as a person, as the psychosis takes over, reason stops, and the voice of reason disappears, which is Jessica, right?
Wow.
And I really wish all the other interviews, to come from this film. I don't know if they're going to live up to this one, because you've had some amazing analysis so far. So I really appreciate you watching the film so closely. That's amazing.
Hey, I appreciate it, because it awakened some things in me, and it connected with me in such a way that I thought, these are some of the things that I had been having problems with. Mm-hmm. I want to tell my dad, who's a devout Christian, I'm a disciple of Christ. I believe in Christ. I'm like, okay, please go read the New Testament again and find out how he treated, marginalized groups of people. Why do you support a party that doesn't do that in America today?
Right.
And I think, like we said earlier, we're moving the goalposts further and further, and we're devolving what we think of Christianity, and it's devolved, in my opinion, to such a way that I don't think it's recognizable with traditional Christianity. It's just something else.
No, you're absolutely right. I mean, there's anytime I have a conversation, doesn't have to be an argument or anything. Anytime I have a conversation with someone who is devoutly conservative, modern American Christian, I always ask, when was the last time that you read the Sermon on the Mount, right? Let's revisit that, right? So
Right.
let's talk about the Sermon on the Mount, right? Let's talk about what Jesus actually said when he was there, and let's look at how that lines up. And well, let's forget about parties and politics. Let's look about the morality of America and who is saying what, who is helping the poor, we should be. The meek shall inherit the earth has nothing to do with the current political climate. Like it doesn't compute, and folks don't want to talk about that. They don't want to acknowledge that because it has become this strange, mutated belief system. And I think there's so much beauty inside the New Testament at times. I also am completely willing to acknowledge the fact that so much of it is hypocritical and contradicts itself left and right. So,
Right.
and I think that's a healthy way to look at things. Is that this might not actually be the Word of God written down into Times New Roman, and but anyways, that's a tangent. But I always find that the Sermon on the Mount is one of the most beautiful humanistic things that's ever been written. And it's hard to get folks to go back and read that and to maybe start over in that belief system, because I have no problem with Christianity and people believing in Christ. I don't have no problem with any religion at all, as long as you're not trying to burn the world down and use that religion as your basis for burning the world down.
Yeah, I agree with you. The last time that I can think of in history where Christianity was subverted and used as a weapon, I don't know. It feels like maybe, I mean, some could say the apathy during World War II when apparently the Vatican did know about the concentration camps, did know. But you got to go back even further, perhaps more dramatically, to the Crusades, and it's like, where are we headed? And I felt like your film is kind of like a warning, a clarion call that says, hey, step back a little bit here. Check your patriotism. Make sure your patriotism isn't diluting your Christianity. There's nothing wrong with being patriotic and loving your country. But if you're going to harm people, or you're going to twist or subvert your religion or your God to support or justify a kind of virulent and malevolent form of patriotism, then we're headed for a very dark place. And I felt like Gunfighter Paradise is a wake-up call. I really do. I enjoyed it for that.
That's amazing, because that's at the end of the day what I hope people would walk away with is deeply thinking about that. And the film asks a lot of questions. It doesn't give any answers, but if anything, I couldn't describe it better than you just did. If it is a warning, it's everything you just said. I couldn't phrase it better than that.
Oh, I appreciate that. And I wanted to just ask, I'm just spitballing here.
Yeah.
But the decision to wear camouflage in every frame that your character appears, as every frame that Stoner is in, I kind of felt like you're not really a specific character. You're an archetype of the Southern hunter. And you do, for lack of a better term, you do kind of blend in with a lot of the thinking Southern fundamentalist patriot. Well, not your character necessarily, but you do kind of blend in. And it was nebulous in a way that I thought you blend in well. You're not trying to, like, I don't know if I'm not doing it any justice by describing it, but I thought the decision to stay in the camouflage was less about what you look like and more about what you're ruminating about, stewing about, thinking about, and trying to adjust in your culture too.
Absolutely, and that the idea to not ever take the camouflage off, and also not ever have any characters acknowledge it, was one of the reasons to do it. First of all, I just thought it was funny, and that it would be funny because it's either going to get old and people are gonna be like, why does this person still have this striped tiger print camo on his face the whole, or it will be a shtick that can be appreciated for its metaphorical value in what you just described, right? And in my mind, when I was writing it, I was like, I don't know if this is going to work, but I think if we have everybody in the film they see it, but they don't really acknowledge it, or they don't bring it up to that person. That's a lot of what we do in the, because we all walk on eggshells in the United States around everybody. We're too afraid to hurt someone's feelings by telling them the truth. My wife is Ethiopian, and when you spend time in Ethiopia, or as everyone knows, when you go to Europe and all these other places, they do not walk on eggshells. They tell you the truth. If you got a really bad haircut, they're just going to tell you, and you'll be like, "Oh yeah, I should get a better one." And you're not gonna freak out and make a post about it and never talk to them again. It's
Sure.
just people tell the truth in a much different way. And so I thought it would be really interesting is if people saw this dude's psychosis manifest on him in this camouflage face paint, they see it. We know that they see it, but they never address it, to
Yeah.
him directly. Even his brother in the film, he's like, he still doesn't break that line of, let me ask you why you are in camouflage face paint. So yeah, that was some of the reasoning behind it.
I really enjoyed that. I really enjoyed that. I also need to talk about the fact, and I think this is why it had to be set in the South. I like the Civil War reenactors because to me, that just typified what you were trying to say. Look, 160, 70 years ago, our country tore itself apart over political ideologies and slavery, or whatever you want to call it. But we tore ourselves apart. It's the most devastating war in American history. We were killing ourselves, brother against brother, father against son. And I felt that that was a very overt signifier that this is probably where we're headed, where brother against brother and fathers against sons, because in a less dramatic sense, like I just said, my brother and I, we don't really talk because we don't really see eye to eye politically. And my dad and I are kind of at odds off and on. Well, I'll check in with him every now and then, but our relationship has been affected over political ideologies, and just as they were 170 years ago, and how destructive that was to America.
Right, right.
So I like that you use those Civil War reenactors, because that was a nice reference to put in here.
It was really a blast to do that, and also I'd hoped it would land the way that you're describing it landing for you, because it is true, and it's sad, and it's unfortunate, and it doesn't need to be that way, because the whole point of making those two reenactors very different characters. Those are two of my oldest best friends, and and so
they were great, by the way. Sorry,
they're so good, Rob and Mike, and one of them is a nice guy. The other guy's a total jerk who still believes in the Confederacy. But they're both wearing Confederate uniforms, and I've been to reenactments, Civil War reenactments, just to kind of do homework and look at it. And I've interviewed people on wearing both uniforms, and it always came back to the fact that, like, oh no, I just really like this, and I had ancestors that were in the war, and I like to have this community. So it was all about them getting together and having community, and not all of them, most of them had both uniforms, and they would just fill in wherever needed, right? And so when I saw that, it blew me away, because I thought this was like a dedicated, if you're from Oregon or if you're from New York, you're wearing blue, and if you're from the South, you're wearing gray, and you guys don't like each other. But it's not true. They all like each other, and they all hang out in camps. They just dress in different uniforms, and I thought that was so interesting. And I thought, well, if they can do that, then if you can point out the fact that we are headed in that direction again for absolutely no reason whatsoever, because a lot of us, regardless of our political affiliation, believe the same things. And it's just we've decided not to talk to each other anymore, And I don't think that this film is going to be the healing factor, the Tylenol that we all need. I don't think that's that. I think it's just really something that's very dark, and I hope makes folks laugh and makes folks talk to each other, because we did have really, really good experiences in the deep, deep South playing this for like true blue Southerners. I mean, Southern Baptists and Methodists and Lutherans, and and folks who are on very hardcore sides of both the left and the right political spectrum were in the same theater, all laughing at the same things and all cringing at the same things, in horror. I was like, okay, this is good. This feels positive,
Yeah, if you're not being run out of the cinema with pitchforks and torches, I think you've achieved something that's good.
Right. What's fun about this film, and what has been really fun to talk about, is just how we made it, because it seriously was what everybody talks about. It's like, oh, just get your friends together, and that's one thing to say say that, and everyone always says the cliche of, you got a phone in your pocket, go make your movie, and I believe that. I try not to say that often because everybody says it. It's become so cliche.
Yeah.
But it was so much fun to make on almost no budget. I mean, we made this film for almost nothing. Nobody got paid anything. I just bought tequila and we took people to Mexican food and paid for their hotel room when I had to. And luckily I had good equipment because, that's what I do for a living.
Yeah.
And so I got my friends together, they read the script, they all, laughed and like, yeah, count me in. And what was really fun is that nobody in this film has ever acted or been in front of the camera at all, ever, except for Jessica Hecht. She's the only person who's ever been in anything. And so the whole cast are first-time actors, and a lot of them are musicians, so they are used to performing and to being in front of crowds, and they're not scared of performing. But what was fun is when I sat down to write the script, I was like, you know what? I'm going to make this for nothing, and I'm going to use non-actors because they'll be flexible. They all have kids, they all have lives, they all have jobs, and I'll work around their nights and their weekends and when they're free. Sometimes we had 5 people that were crewing, sometimes we had 2 people that were crewing. So we did not have 40 or 50 people standing around,
Right.
and we did not have gaffers and grips and like an AC and an AD. We didn't have any of that. But what was so much fun is it was because of those limitations, we had absolute complete freedom to make what we wanted to make, and you don't get that when you have to spend 3 years raising $5 million to make an indie film and you have all these
Right.
producers, and you already have a distributor lined up. And it was a joy to make because when I sit down to write the script, and this is what I tell my students currently right now who are screenwriters, if you're wanting to do an independent film and you have friends who are good, who you trust, who you think can be good on screen, write a script around them. Write a script around what they can do as your friends so that they're not actually acting, they're just being themselves in a character role. And so, yeah, I would have to coach a few lines here and there. Oh, you're too familiar. You don't actually know him for 15
Yeah.
years, But that was really all, like, it was so free to make it that way, that it was so much fun because Joel is actually a cable installer in real life, and the character that he plays in the film. Yeah. And so everybody just played a version of themselves. And so that's why it worked, and that's why I've gotten so many great critiques on the acting in the film. And when I tell folks, those folks had never acted before, they're like, what? And it's because they're not acting. It's because, I seriously wrote those lines and wrote that script around my friends, thinking about them. And then if we were on set and they were reading something that felt forced or didn't feel right, and we'd be like, this doesn't feel right, I just asked them, how would you say that in real life? And they're like, I would say it like this, say it like that. And then we rolled with that. So just an advice to any screenwriters or directors out there that not to be too precious when you're doing anything that's super indie. Just don't be too precious with it. And it'll come out a lot more authentic if you're not, married to your script as the perfect written device to convey your idea. It's a lot more fun that way too.
Wow. I love that. That I could enshrine what you just said. I love it. That's perfect. The other thing I think that's so good about independent film and why I love independent film, I love it. I love watching as much as I can, is because I feel like that is the medium, especially as a screenwriter, that has less interference with producers who are putting up money and then want a seat at the table to chime in on their 2 cents, or wait a minute, why don't we change this? Or, I am financing the movie. So it feels like authentic stories that take the greatest risks are in the independent film market. Mm-hmm. They're not going before, you're not screen testing your films. You're not assembling ideas for plot via committee. And I really just love that. And by the way, I didn't get a chance to talk about how much I loved watching you and Joel. If you told me Joel had never done any acting, I wouldn't have believed you before I watched this film, because the two of you remind me. Your chemistry was very similar to Johnny Depp and oh my gosh, Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas.
Benicio del Toro.
Benicio del Toro. Yeah, it was very real, very funny at times. And I loved it. And I think it's even more funny to know that Joe is an actual cable guy, which, that's so great. And I don't really have a question off of that, just an observation that it worked together, that the acting, you shouldn't have told me that nobody had acted in this film because I wouldn't have known. I wouldn't have known.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's the biggest compliment I think any of them. I will tell them you said that, and
Thank you.
they will be very happy. That's the biggest compliment any of them could get, any of us. So yeah, I know I really appreciate you taking the time to watch the film and to
Yeah.
watch it as closely as you did, because your analysis was extraordinary.
Well, I appreciate it. And I wish we had more films like this. I think our country needs it. I think the national discourse needs to be exposed more to it. I wish more voices were as brave as yours were to say this and to put this out there. And there is a bravery to the things you're talking about, because there are very sensitive, strong feelings about patriotism, Christianity, and and how those divergent things converge sometimes and get messed up in each other and twisted. So I haven't seen anything quite like it. So I thank you for making this film, Jethro. It is brilliant from beginning to end.
Thank you so much, Joseph. I really appreciate that.
You bet. Listen, thanks again for having me. This has been such a gift, and you are such a talented guy, and a great conversation I had with you. If you make anything else, I want to discuss it. I want to see it and discuss it with you.
You'll be the first to know. It's in the works right now, so you'll be the first to know.
Amazing. Okay. All right. Well, listen, Jethro, have a great one, and I wish you continued success with this film.
Thank you so much.
You bet. Bye-bye.